gentleman of Kenyan politics has gone to rest. A decorated and long career, all in the service of the public, spanning decades of scaling the ladder of both life and politics. From the bright beginnings of a glittering academic excellence in the hands of Catholic missionaries at Mwai High School, to the affirmation of a way of life at the then prestigious Makerere University in Uganda, Mwai Kibaki's arrival on the national stage presented itself as an irrefutable story of academic prowess. Humble beginnings as executive officer of a political infancy could well have felt like a misdeployment for a fast-rising lecturer doing so well in East Africa's best university in the day. But a journey of 1,000 miles saw Mwai Kibaki move from an executive officer to an assistant minister, and then a minister and a vice president, then the leader of opposition, and then the icing on the massive political cake, President of the Republic of Kenya. We eulogize Mwai Kibaki on a night regular politics refuses to go to bed. Presidential aspirants, at least two by our quiet count, are spending sleepless nights, probably shaking like leaves, with a nightmare of that yet to be spotted animal called the running mate. In Azimio, Martha Karua is on a full-blown campaign, Kalonzo Musyoka is speaking in tongues, and Peter Kenneth is maybe, just maybe, meditating. In Kenya Kwanza, it is contrastingly dead quiet. And tonight we're out in search for any signs of life, any breathing or movement in the running mate's bunker. This is News Gang. My take, like Jamila's memo, Gashuri's punchline, and Kaikai's kicker, all combine to make one big journalistic bow for Emilio Mwai Kibaki. Good evening. The News Gang starts right now.
Mwai Kibaki, naapa kwamba nitatenda kazi zangu za urais. Ewe Mwenyezi Mungu unisaidie.
Indeed, what a moment that was of President Mwai Kibaki being inaugurated into office, being sworn in on that day. And here we are, of course, paying tribute to him ahead of now that final journey for him tomorrow. I remember that moment distinctly, ladies and gentlemen, because I had just started out in my career, actually, when, President Kibaki took office. And it was actually my first time to vote as well. So it was, quite a poignant moment for me. And what a time, because Kenyans were voted as most optimistic and happiest people on earth, at that moment.
Yvonne, I was there
at
Uhuru Park. I remember, and I think Linus was also there. I was covering my first elections, and it was something else. I've not forgotten that feeling to date. The crowds, the euphoria, the feeling. My lecturer once called it an accident. He said, I don't think that would happen again anytime soon. But at the time, there was joy, there was hope, there was the belief in a new Kenya. And the fact that now, after 24 years of President Moi's rule, there would be some change. And the fact that we saw all these leaders together, in fact, even before the swearing in, there was when Raila said, Kibaki Tosha. And then we had all these leaders standing up and lifting their hands. And you could feel that everyone felt that they were being represented by each of those leaders who were there. And then now the elections, and Mwai Kibaki won with 67%. And the optimism was there. And I think at that time, the number of people who turned out to vote was almost historic in terms of now the numbers. So I still remember today that I've covered several more elections since then. The 2007 one, 2013, 2017. But nothing compares to that, Yvonne. It was unbelievable.
Yeah.
That's what I can say. It was unbelievable.
Yeah, and we said at the start of the show, it was, icing on the cake for his political career. And bowing out now, what's your recollection and reflection, Linus?
There are very, very few moments in the history of nations when a country goes through moments of national renewal. And December 30th, 2002 was one such moment. I was there, and this was really the peak of the ecstasy that had been sweeping through the country from the 14th of October 2002 all the way to the 27th of December 2002, when the election was held. I remember, because for the younger generations and people who did not witness the ecstasy of the moment of independence, the victory of Mwai Kibaki presented such moment. Right? It felt like that. And there was a reason that that felt that way, and that was the long reign of KANU. KANU had ruled the country from independence to that time. And the other thing was, of course, the invincible impression that everyone had of KANU. Nobody knew it was possible to defeat the Kenya African National Union. Nobody really, even to the last minute, very few had accepted that President Daniel Toroitich arap Moi would leave office. But then that moment came. So history placed Mwai Kibaki in a very nice place. And there's something that can also be said about that moment. Mwai Kibaki himself was going through a moment of renewal. He was getting a new self. In Kiswahili, Jamila would say kupata nafsi mpya, because Mwai Kibaki was a KANU vice president for more than 10 years. And he was an insider of the previous administrations. But history picked him as the liberator, the face of liberation of Kenya. And then I'm sure we'll talk about his achievements. And one of the things that really he delivered was that feeling, because you need to deliver a feeling of happiness first. And that itself, people forget to measure that optimism that greeted his coming to office. I was on a plane going back to Johannesburg after his swearing in, and it was the talk of the passengers in the plane. Oh, you are Kenyan. Yeah. Oh, you guys are doing so well. You are happy. A little did we know that it wasn't going to last long. By my estimation, our ecstasy, our feel-good thing was up and over in 6 months. Yeah. The 100 days MOU, and everything that was promised, you started to see the cracks almost immediately. Francis?
Well, I'm at a loss because my first proper interaction with President Mwai Kibaki, the late, was in 2007. 2002, I didn't vote. I was still in university. So my first interaction with him was 2007. 2006, before I came to Citizen, while I was at the national broadcaster, covering the president was the preserve of the senior guys in the newsroom. At that point, I remember Nelly Mora, I remember Catherine Atundi, Graham Kirwa, Kennedy Osir. Those are the guys who used to cover the president. And as a very young reporter at that time, I used to admire that they used to go to presidential functions. So 2007, when I got an opportunity to cover his campaigns under PNU then, that is the first interaction I had with the president. And this is what I remember President Mwai Kibaki about, especially as a journalist. You needed to be extremely attentive in his functions, because his off-cuff speeches were not as direct as probably many people would expect, but they usually were very loaded. He never addressed, even when, let's say, he wanted to address his then key rival, Raila Odinga, the ODM leader, he never addressed him in first person. Or whenever he wanted to address a certain scenario that he was not happy with, he used third-person kind of narration. How watu?
Yule mtu.
Yule mtu. wanasema. So you needed to be very careful about what he's saying and then relate it to what has happened, let's say, the last few days or the last few weeks. Only then would the function make sense. And it got to a point where even covering him was an art. And not everybody would cover the president. You needed to go there, be very, very attentive, because you could easily miss the story. And you can imagine back then, there was not proper internet as it were back in the days. So away from the robust discussions that you see today, when there's a function and people are already discussing what could have happened, photos are being shared all over.
Yeah. At
that point, you needed to be very, very careful, lest you miss the story and it is the splash in the newspapers the following day.
Yeah.
So I would say covering him early on in my career was one of the things that taught me certain things about journalism. One, attention to detail. Number two, the unsaid, the unspoken. It was not so much about what he was saying, but so much about what he was not saying.
What he was not saying.
I think, Yvonne, also one of the other reflections that I would have is other than what we talked about and what Gashuri says, I'll just remember one incident where I remember when he was coming back from London after his accident, he was taken away for treatment. He had the whole convoy from the airport, and I don't think any of us realized that we walked all the way from the airport. To the CBD. To the CBD.
On foot, yes.
On foot, because we were alongside the vehicle, you know, trying to cover it. And it was much more difficult to do live broadcasts back then than it is now.
Yeah.
These days, you know, you just have the backpack. Technology has evolved. Those days, even having an OB van to be able to do a live broadcast was a tough task. So we just had to walk beside the vehicle with all the Kenyans who were running all the way from the airport. And you didn't even realize that you had done that. But besides that, Yvonne, I think for me, when I was listening to Kenyans talk about the late president during the 3 days of when the body lay at the National Assembly, there was a lady called Gladys Mudheo who was interviewed by Raquel Mwai, and she had been one of the people who had come there, and she said, from class 1, alisoma bure. Yeah? Alisoma bure kwa sababu. Yeah, that's what she remembers Mwai Kibaki. That's the reason why she came, because of that free primary education. And here in studio, we had a gentleman called Kioko Mwinzi. Sam Gituku had him in studio. He went to class 1 when he was 11 years old in 2003, after the free primary education was introduced. Before that, him and his siblings were unable to afford school fees. And he finished his KCPE when he was 19 years old. At 19 years old, if you went through school the way most people would, you'd be finishing university. But he was finishing KCPE when he was 19, and he went to Lenana School. And then in 2014, he graduated. And then 2019, at 28 years old, his final, when he got his degree in computer science from Masinde Muliro, he works as a software engineer now, and he's able now to educate his siblings. So when he talked about, for him, he says that is how he remembers President Mwai Kibaki. But even with all that goodwill, there were some lessons which I think should have been learned, because the first term, with all the misukosuko that came with it, after all the goodwill that the people had, we can talk about free primary education, we can talk about the economy, that really are some of the things we remember him by. And then 2007 happened. And then the social fabric was torn. We became so ethnic in our politics. And then now politicians were found to have been behind what happened. But then even after the next elections, some of the politicians who were at different sides during back then became friends, okay? And then we realized that when politicians become friends, things actually do work to some extent. We can talk about the 2010 Constitution as an example. But then when they don't, we suffer as Kenyans. But I think we need to learn our lessons, that our leaders, as they are, what they say, the alliances that they make, usually don't last very long, whether they are kwa urafiki ama kwa kukosana. And I think as a people, we need to keep that in mind even as we go into the elections, that we need to look at why we elect the leaders we elect, looking at their character from the past to the present, and who we want as leaders in the future.
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, you mentioned post-election violence, and that for me was one of, the striking things. Look, President Mwai Kibaki came in, like we've said here, on a wave of optimism. And it's interesting that, he came in on a multi-ethnic coalition, right? All those people who are raising their hands, like you said, you could see the face of Kenya. And then suddenly, just 5 years later, we were now turned on each other ethnically. And I think let me start with the good. I mean, some great things that he did for the economy, restoring public trust, in public institutions, streamlining them, ensuring they're running in the right way, including revenue collection. I think it jumped 116% in the year 2005, and he more than tripled our revenue collection from his time in office. I think it was 200 billion in the year 2002, and was way more than 600 billion. I believe slightly over 700 billion in 2012 by the time he was exiting and handing over to the current administration. I mean, some of the things you could talk about, the internet connection we enjoy now, all of that was done, under his tenure. And so there was quite a bit in terms of understanding the economy and putting that on track. And remember, this was coming after KANU and President Mwai's rule of 24 years, when many of our industries were completely broken down. Kikomi, if you take a look at that, and there were Rivertex, and there were several others. So he can be hailed for that. However, no human is perfect. And, in 2007, the country, went down. I believe we should also talk about the 2005 failed referendum. And then there was 2007. But shortly after that, then there was 2008 when he launched now Vision 2030 as we know it. But, for a man who... So well, there are, of course, a number of issues, during his term. But I think it's safe to say that, overall, a lot will be missed about the third president of the Republic. Linus?
That's very true, Yvonne. Kibaki's story is divided into two parts. There is a successful part that is made of an economic base, and then there is a contested legacy that is made up of the political side of things. And you are totally right that the questions and the base of the argument has always been the 2007-2008 post-election violence. But there's something that Kenyans, either by choice or what we normally call our own collective amnesia, choose to forget that there was... 2007 did not just happen overnight. And for all fair observers of our history, things started going down when the coalition was not working properly. When power players came in the same old ways of, a small clique of powerful ruling circle to the exclusion of others. You see, the message in the National Rainbow Coalition was exactly that, a rainbow coalition. It needed to have been a completely inclusive government and seen to be an inclusive government through and through. That was, I think, the covenant in the National Rainbow Coalition. But when things started going wrong, and I think it was captured so well by Mwai Kibaki's former vice president, the late Michael Amalo Kijana, he spoke in Mount Kenya Safari Club in August 2003 and said, he was asking the gathering of cabinet ministers and MPs, would we excite Kenyans the way we did in 2002? And that was a few months, actually it wasn't August, but I think around June. Because he passed on unfortunately in August, and he said, "Would we excite Kenyans the same way we did in the election?" And the answer to all his questions was no. There is the unfortunate thing that happened with the Rainbow Coalition, which is reverting to power games immediately after the election. In a way, Mwai Kibaki and his team completely missed the message. They completely missed the message of October 14th. They completely missed the message of December 27th. The overwhelming mandate was a liberation mandate that carries us along. Let's go to Canaan, all pun intended. That was the intention of everybody. And when things started looking the way they did in January, February, and some of us could tell with the purge that was going on, purging the government of Mwai appointees. Those are signs of trouble. That's one way of really mismanaging a transition, where it seems people are being removed from office just because they come from the background of the former president. So 2007 really was a product of pent-up emotions that were built over time. And there was a moment when that was released through the 2005 constitutional referendum. That referendum was not about the constitution. That should really go down in history very clearly. 2005 was a message about 2002. We broke up. We had a problem. We'll reject everything that you will do. We'll stand.
The unkept promise.
Absolutely, absolutely. So 2005 referendum became that test. And then 2005 also became a test run.
Yes,
for elections. And that is why 2005 gave birth to the Orange Democratic Movement, ODM.
I remember Raila said, na mukicheza na hii chungwa itakuwa chama.
Balala said the same.
That's what happened.
Yes. And it became a party because the electoral element of it really worked wonders, because it was 60% against 30-something percent. And if you look at the voting patterns of 2005 and the voting patterns of 2007, they took exactly the same pattern. Now, President Kibaki again, because there's this contested political legacy, missed the point in 2005. Instead of fixing, suppose ziba ufa, tajenga ukuta, because 2005 should not have been seen as a referendum contest. It should have been seen for what it was, which is the continued disintegration of the social fabric and even ethnic fabric of Kenya. It was really a warning shot of 2007 that if you don't manage this, then it becomes a problem. What does Kibaki do? He fires the cabinet.
Nimewaachisha mawaziri wangu wote.
There's a lot of literature to that effect, and Francis Mudhaura, the head of public service, does admit that they advised the president, together with others, that now, because this has happened, you need to dissolve the cabinet and reconstitute it. But you do that, and it didn't make our political situation better, it only made it worse. So by the time we went to the 2007 election, this country was in pieces. So there is a whole journey to it. I see all these arguments about how it was planned into that. There was nothing. I don't agree that it was just around that particular period. We were dealing with a society that is already broken. Now, when the election result went the way it did, why did we have the explosion of violence? We did because of all those pent-up emotions. It's a journey, because there were people who were waiting for 2007 to resolve their political issues through election. Remove Mwai Kibaki. That was the message of the Orange Democratic Movement. Of course, it's contested what really happened with the numbers, and Kriegler, is it Justice Kriegler? Says we do not know who won. But then Francis Mudhaura, the head of public service, also offers some very great insights into what was going on in the State House at the time. He said he was with Mwai Kibaki, and on the evening of the elections, the results were streaming in, and it looked worrying. And Mudhaura is quoted as saying the voting pattern is taking the pattern of the 2005 referendum. But there was a rider there, and he said the strongholds of the Party of National Unity, President Kibaki's PNU, had not yet reported, and so there is a chance that this can be reversed. But remember, on the night of was it 29th? Either 29th, I think it was 28th or 29th. 29th, actually. Of December, yes. the gap was about 1 million, and then it was wiped out
to about 300,000 in
the morning, and wiped out completely by the time Kivuit was announcing the results. This, of course, will be a period that will still be spoken about when it comes to Mwai Kibaki's political legacy. On the economic side, a very colorful, undoubtedly formidable legacy. Mwai Kibaki is being hailed as the best economic manager that has ever walked to State House since independence. And when you look at that, there is a lot of evidence to attach to that. Mwai Kibaki, as an economist, has always been a very thoughtful, contemplative planner who understands the economy so deeply. There are simple examples we could give in 2003 that we couldn't in 2002. In 2002, access to credit was quite a problem. You can't walk to a bank and get a loan because you'll be told things like you are a high-risk borrower. Francis, high-risk borrower. A bank would tell you that. But then the Kibaki magic on the economy. Yeah. And remember, he didn't say government will give people money at all. He didn't say there'll be this project to give people loans. Kibaki knew if you want a loan, it has to come through a commercial bank. And what did he do? He tackled the question of interest rates. Yeah. And basically held banks to account in a way that has not been done before. What did that result in? It resulted in simple, visible things. And I always remember the thriving, what did we call them? They are called stalls.
Yeah, at the exhibition.
And exhibitions, where you have these little shops.
Cubicles, right.
Cubicles all over the place. They just...
People were going to Turkey and China and bringing all this stuff. Like all of a sudden, it was this... huge blow up because they had access to credit.
Regular people. And this tells you something about Kibaki's economic mind. He knows what buttons to press for things to work. Remember, the free primary education thing was rolled out immediately. Yeah. And there was, I remember the stories we were doing and the scramble for places in schools that had no places, basically.
Remember Kimani Maruge?
Kimani Maruge going
the
to
old
school.
Man going back to school was just an epitome of what you're saying.
Absolutely, absolutely. So Kibaki in the deck touched all the right buttons when it comes to the economy and touched all the wrong buttons when it came to politics.
It would seem, a mixed bag for him with economy and politics. I mean, I think, just to buttress what you're saying, 18 million Kenyans with access to financial services by the time he was leaving office, compared to less than 1 million when he took office just 10 years before. One of the interesting things, I think, now is that Kenya has no living former presidents following the death of Mwai Kibaki.
Yes.
And that President Uhuru Kenyatta has presided over the final send-off of two former presidents in just 2 years. So, there was a look on his face that was, that was really somber when he was, when he viewed the body, and of course, then started that off for the rest of Kenyans. I mean, it's a difficult.
To what you're saying about Kenya not having a living former president, Uganda will just say, me too.
Wow. I see what you did there.
Look. And here's an interesting thing, though. Kibaki, the Ugandan president was actually here for the inauguration of, President Mwai Kibaki 20 years ago.
Yes.
And will now most likely be coming.
He was there for Uhuru's?
Yes, and will now most likely be coming for the funeral.
Tomorrow, yes.
Tomorrow. Uganda?
I remember 2 years ago, during the funeral, the state funeral of Mzee Daniel Arap Mwai, I still remember that look on Kibaki's face when he came to view the body at Parliament buildings. And you could see the pain. And he walked away, said nothing. When I saw President Uhuru Kenyatta there early this week, you could tell the raw emotions around it.
Yeah.
But it also tells us something that a head of state, a president, has his or her own legacy. And that legacy will be what not necessarily people see, but largely what people feel about your term in office. Talk to anybody, largely they will tell you, especially people of our generation and the generation slightly above us, they will tell you they made proper money during Kibaki's tenure, because at that time it became very easy for many people to do business, to access credit, and actually to own. Ask quite a number of people, they will tell you their first tangible proper thing they owned during that period. And so there's a lot of good stuff that can be said about the late President Mwai Kibaki, especially on matters economy. I remember very early on in my career, we went to Kajiado County, then Kajiado District, with Professor George Saitoti. He had gone to launch a rural electrification program deep inside Kajiado County. And that is a story that is told of many other parts of the country. And it was the idea of electrify the shopping centers and primary schools, and therein you will access electricity across the villages. And quite a number of people today will tell you they got electricity. Okay, the country is not yet fully covered by electricity. There are some portions that are still not yet, but a good portion of our country got access to that electricity during Kibaki's tenure. Infrastructure, roads, that remains one of the key highlights of President Mwai Kibaki. Quite a number of people will tell you, by the way, we saw the first tarmac road in our area during his tenure. I would say, in terms of education, in terms of infrastructure, in terms of economic planning, he did a very good job. That one I would give him an A. The biggest failure was on politics. He failed on matters politics. Because at that point, you would see probably he concentrated too much on the economy and maybe hoped that things will work out in a certain way. But our politics remains, back then and now, remains the same. There's the ethnic factor. There's also the personal interest of the political players.
Especially those around the presidency.
Yeah, especially those around the presidency and those seeking the presidency. Because, I mean, look, from 2002 to date, we still have not so much has changed in terms of the key players in the political scene. And so probably even as we fix our economy, as we fix our infrastructure, as we fix our health, education and everything else, I think as a matter of priority, probably we will need to fix our politics.
As we take a break, we're taking a break. Just one thing for those who grew up during the Kanu years. We never thought we'd see a non-Kanu president, and we never thought we'd see a president who was not Moi. I remember kids used to say, Rice Moi Kibaki. You know, it took a while because all the presidents were Moi for a long time, for a lot of people who grew up during my time. So you can imagine, what was going through.
Even as Moi wa Uganda ni nani?
That's true.
Moi wa Tanzania ni nani?
Yes,
24 years, you know, is a whole human. So of course, that would definitely stick around for a while. Of course, our coverage of the final journey for President Mwai Kibaki begins tomorrow, and you can be sure to catch that from 6 a.m. bright and early here for that state funeral. And then, of course, all eyes will be in Odaya for Saturday. So stay with us for that coverage that starts tomorrow. However, one thing to note was that his death came deep in the middle of political party nominations and somewhat put a pause. Over the last week, you've not seen any political rallies. However, that doesn't mean the politics took a break. There's been much jostling with nominations. In fact, there's a deadline today. We'll be talking about that, the nominations, and of course, that all-important question of the running mate. That and much more when we return. This is News Gang.